Welcome to Node Mode, the NFT podcast on digital art. We talk with artists, collectors, and reasonably intelligent individuals about all things NFTs. Nothing in this video is financial advice. We're not financial advisors. The NFT space is risky, so always remember to do your own research. And today, I've got back-to-back episodes, really excited. And this episode, we are joined by Trevor.BTC. I am very excited to learn about the future of Bitcoin and NFTs. Pio is going to love me for making this video. Trevor, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Node, thanks for having me. And been watching your show for a while. You called the success of 12-fold. I remember on the NFT morning show. So, and you called it to be more successful than I expected. So, great job with
Nice.
everything you're doing. Yeah.
No, well, thank you. It was despite, much to my chagrin. I will admit, I'm not a massive fan of 12-fold myself. I think the concept, the idea that they did it on Bitcoin, I think was cool. And then that's kind of where it ended for me. But still, really, really cool. So one of my first questions I love to ask guests is like, I'm pick a year. So this year, I'm going to pick like 2014. What were you doing in the year 2014? I always like to know what people are doing maybe before the industry or if you were already in the industry at that point.
Yeah. So in 2014, I was running a startup called Javelin, and we had just closed like 1.5 million in venture capital the year before. I was based in New York City. We basically were building enterprise software for enterprise productivity software for innovation teams to like do market validation for new product launches. And we were also running a boot camp series called Lean Startup Machine, which is like the first training program on Lean Startup methodology. And we were like working on growing that around the world. So I was also actually publishing a book. So I published a book called The Lean Enterprise, which was like on corporate innovation, lean startup. And so that was a lot going on that year, basically.
Yeah, a little bit, I'm trying to think of what I was doing in that year. And I'm like, yeah, I think I was working somewhere doing one random thing. And so, I mean, good on you. Were you, okay, so at what point did you fall into the Bitcoin rabbit hole? Had you already started back then?
Yeah, I had started in 2013. And so one of the co-founders of Stacks is there's Ryan Shea and Manib Ali. They're the co-founders. And I was friends with Ryan for a few years. We kind of started in the same co-working space in I think 2010. I was working for the VC fund there, and he was working for a startup there, and he kind of tuned got me onto it, as well as my co-founder of Javelin, Obi Fernandez, was a really awesome Ruby on Rails dev, and like kind of well-known Ruby on Rails dev, and he was into it too. And so I bought a bunch of Bitcoin, and then I'm a very much like a bottoms up market adoption, go to market. Like that's how I view that's the reality of the lens I view reality through. And so for me, I was doing a lot of reading on Bitcoin and like, what is the use case? What is this going to become, and how's it going to work? And I was buying it like 100, like from 100 up to 1,000. I just kept kind of buying on the way up. And then I knew that like remittances in China was a big reason why it was like growing. And so when I saw China banned it, I was watching like the price every day. I started to kind of see it dip, and I ended up like liquidating my bags, but and I was up like a lot of money, of course, for a little bit, but then it started going down. I started to like take like kind of like a stop loss approach, and so I ended up selling all my Bitcoin, and then I focused on the Web 2 space and SaaS and enterprise software, and in like the 2018 like 2017 era with like the ICOs, I just thought that was like so stupid. And like you're getting Facebook ads for like Jesus coin and date coin and like these things that are like totally coming from someone who spends all their time working with founders to be like, do a minimum viable product, start small,
Yeah.
Raise like as much as you can, but don't like raise like too much money, to seeing like people having like these ideas where it's like, we're going to have an AI chatbot and, tokenomics, decentralization, blockchain, like throwing every buzzword in the book onto their landing page. I was just like, I would have bet that the whole space was going to go to zero at that point, until 2021 came around. And I was like, okay, like let's look at MetaMask, look at DeFi, look at the Beeple sale, right? Now I'm like, all right, this is turned the corner in a big way. This is like when AlphaGo, like Google, they developed the deep learning model that beat the world champion in Go, and we've gone from like a world where yes, computers beat like the world's best chess player. I think it was like in the 80s. We've had like almost 40 years where there hasn't been an advance in computers' abilities to think, and now it's like a game changer. Now the floodgates are open, and so when I saw that, I was like, all right, now it's actually going to make it. Like let's go into this, and I kind of worked backwards deductively from like, hey, Ethereum has found some product market fit with a new market. It's not reached the mass market yet, but there's clear user adoption and end user value here. It's turned a corner. To, well, hey, look at Bitcoin, and none of this has reached Bitcoin yet. But yet some people have some really interesting ways that Bitcoin can do the same things that Ethereum can do. Of course, I had the advantage of knowing the founders of Stacks since 2013, and I was an advisor to Ryan Manib, helping them like with their first fundraise because I had just done it myself. And so that just like clicked to me as like, wow, this is a massive asymmetric opportunity. And so yeah, that's how I kind of got back into the space and kind of like how I view the space in terms of, I was not like, always believed in Bitcoin ideologically. I always believed in it, philosophically, but it doesn't matter. Like if it's not going to get adopted by users, it's just a good idea, right? It's not going to be, it might be a lost cause, right? But now that I've seen, hey, Ethereum has actually reached the level of like quality that I think it shows it's on the road to a path where it can be adopted en masse. And then I work back to the special properties of Bitcoin, the decentralization, the neutrality of it, the lack of a leader, the predictability of its supply. Now I'm thinking, hey, there's a big opportunity here, and actually, it's already a bigger liquidity base than Ethereum. Perhaps these use cases will be even bigger on Bitcoin.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, buyer beware. You're talking to someone that started off. I kind of went into the Bitcoin rabbit hole and became a maxi for like a hot minute, and then I fell into Ethereum and then became a maxi for a while, and now I'm starting to like come back around a little bit to Bitcoin. And so I'm gonna need your help to help me understand some of these things. So the first thing is like when I look at Bitcoin, I totally agree with everything that you've mentioned. The one thing that I don't fully understand, and that feels like maybe even you have had opposition on from some of the maxis out there in the Bitcoin world, is like, hey, Bitcoin is Bitcoin and it's Bitcoin, so it's nothing else, and don't let it be anything else. Is that narrative? I know it's definitely shifting on your side of things, but do you see it in the broader kind of Bitcoiner world, like that Bitcoin can be more than just, hey, Bitcoin is Bitcoin and don't build anything on top of it because it's not really meant for that? Do you feel like that tide is changing on the Bitcoin side of things, or are you still kind of fighting some of the maxis out there to say like, hey, we can build a, if Stacks is a layer 2, right? Like if you call it that, we can build things on it. Like we really can, and we really should. How is that going? Is that battle? Are you winning that battle, or do you feel like there's still some opposition?
Oh, I think there's still some opposition, but I think that since the launch of Ordinals, we've come from a place where we're fighting on the back foot to now we're 2 steps ahead of the game. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, we're down a piece on the chessboard, and now we've taken the queen, or we've taken, some of those high value pieces, and it's just kind of playing the rest of the game out. And I think, I don't even really view it. I think that, this opposition adversarial thing is maybe not even the right lens to look at it through. I view it as an educational challenge. And I think that if you look at the larger Bitcoin community, first of all, there's more of a culture of, hey, listen, I love doing podcasts. I consider myself a podcaster. But if you look at the media on Bitcoin, it's primarily non-technical podcasters,
Yeah,
who are very focused on economics. and not technology and not go to market, right? Like I've spent a decade on go to market in Silicon Valley, Web 2, and growth hacking, like all these like we have the playbooks, you know what I'm saying? Like Silicon Valley wrote the lean startup, it wrote hacking growth, it wrote these seminal business ideology or methodologies and playbooks that are now taught at Harvard Business School. You know, I gave speeches at Harvard Business School and Wharton and Princeton and everything like that, you know, 10 years ago. And Bitcoin doesn't have that. They have no one talking about that. They have no one talking about like how is this going to reach mass adoption. And you know, I don't think it's going to be like we just had the second and third biggest bank failures, and we had $100 million in liquidity come into the space. But we're not going to have a moment where 100 million users come in overnight. We're not going to have a moment where 500 million users come in overnight. If you look at Pokemon Go, right? Month 1, 100 million downloads. Month 2, 500 million downloads. We have 17 million monthly active addresses on Bitcoin, 7 million on Ethereum. Like we're not even close. And people have been trying for 10 years to get point of sale adopted for Bitcoin. Coinbase started doing that. They pivoted away from that. Stripe has integrated Bitcoin, then removed it, then integrated it again. Same with like PayPal and like every other company. And so point of sale is not the path to becoming a medium of exchange. People overly focus on the properties of sound money, which includes what you can do with it. But they treat like all the other properties as equally valid, when the most important property is what you can do with it. Yes, the supply matters. Yes, the predictability matters. Yes, the decentralization matters. But the most important thing is what you can do with it. Those things are good. Like, you know, like those things are fine. Like, let's focus on what you can do with it. And it starts with having an online, as an online medium exchange for digital assets with Ordinals, all different kinds of it. That's how we started. That's how Ethereum has started it. People are denominating more things in Ethereum than they are in Bitcoin. We used to denominate everything in Bitcoin, right? Before we had stable coins. And now it's like with the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, our goal is like it's not gonna happen to be one big thing. Like even if the entire fiat system collapsed tomorrow, there's no guarantee everyone's gonna pour into Bitcoin, right? But if we solve end user problems, if startups come along and they build useful use cases with Bitcoin, insurance, you know, lending, different types of payments, and of course digital art, non-fungible assets. There's a whole spectrum of probably thousands of ideas and startups that could be built. And if we can get like 15 of them to give people a reason to use Bitcoin one more time per month, we're halfway to making Bitcoin something people need to use every day. And for me, it comes down to like looking at something that the Larry Page coined, which is called the toothbrush test, which is like a heuristic that if a product is used at least twice per day, that it's much more likely to reach mass adoption on the scale of like 1 billion users than a product that you use like once a month or you just like keep it in a wallet.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense, and I like the way that you have framed it as well. You know, like I feel like a lot of the rhetoric that surrounds Bitcoin is all about you know the store of value thesis, right? And so it's just like, hey, if that's all that it ever is, it can match the market cap of gold, you know, and that's great. Like that's why I kind of caved back in and was like, okay, I'm gonna own a little bit of Bitcoin just in case, like you know, my beloved ETH doesn't do everything that I'm hoping and dreaming it to do. But I'd love to understand the you know, for a dumb guy like me that doesn't understand tech very well, the layer 2 to layer 1 kind of how that works on Bitcoin versus how that works on ETH, right? So I know a lot of people's arguments is like, well, you know, like a layer 2 is kind of only as secure as like the bridge to get there, and which kind of makes it you know a whole lot more risky than just being on a layer 1. And you're focused on building you know a layer 2 essentially, right, on Bitcoin, which is stacks. And so tell me how that works and how you know how that kind of plays into the decentralization side of things in terms of you know going between this an L1 and an L2 on Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'll do my best to explain it. It's a real mind bender, I'll tell you that. So the when it comes to Bitcoin, right, like a traditional L2 is not possible. So the way an L2 works on Ethereum is that you have um, the the network, and then you have a single sequencer, and that sequencer submits the blocks one by one, and then they're verified by the base chain, right? So the base chain is actually it's almost like submitting it to the base chain directly, but in a like more scalable way on a second layer. Now with Bitcoin, there's no verifier. There's no possibility of a verifier. Um, of course, Lightning is actually like a traditional L2. You could think of how
Mm.
L2s on Ethereum work. It's closer to it because a true like the concept of a true L2, I would say, is defined by scaling the existing functionality of the base layer, right? So that's what Lightning does. Is it gives you it's a peer-to-peer network. It's not a blockchain like Arbitrum or Optimism. Um, it is just exchanges messages, and then you can settle the transactions on the main chain. So you're just exchanging text files across a network, and it's adjusting balances across multiple people. Like you, me, Po, and Nick have a bar tab, and then we settle amongst ourselves at the end of the night, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of like what Lightning is doing. But with Stacks, it's actually a blockchain on top of Bitcoin, and it is adding a new virtual environment. So you have Ethereum and Arbitrum, you have EVM and EVM, right? And then EVM is verifying EVM. Bitcoin and Stacks, you have Bitcoin script, which is a very narrow language, which is actually a value proposition of it, because it means that you don't have an issue where um, on Bitcoin, like someone has a smart contract that ends up being written improperly and you lose all your funds. Like it's much more. There's much less of an attack surface in terms of the type of applications people can write on Bitcoin L1, which means that it's much more secure because
Mm.
you can't mess it up, and there's no creative there's less creativity, and so when it comes to Solidity, it's like super expressive. Like it's Turing complete. You can do anything. Bitcoin script is like very narrow, which is makes it's a single purpose blockchain. It's like a product with a single feature. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like this is a Phillips head screwdriver. It's everything is oriented to do one thing, and that's to be money and to send payments securely, right? For large amounts of money. And so with Stacks, we're introducing a new virtual environment called the Clarity virtual environment, which is not Turing complete, but it's decidable. And so the difference is that it can do essentially anything Ethereum can do except for looping. And the reason is because with smart contracts, looping introduces security issues in the terms of like um, when you make a MetaMask transaction, um, MetaMask can't actually predict what the transaction is going to do because it could go on infinitely until you run out of gas for that transaction.
Mm.
And now there's tools like Pocket Universe, which are fantastic because they run a fork of Ethereum, and they will simulate the transaction for you and probably tell you like 90% of the time you're going to get rugged. Um, but as a programming language, it's the difference between a decidable and a Turing complete language. And so the way Stacks works is that it's a separate blockchain, but every block is mined through Bitcoin transactions and recorded to the Bitcoin blockchain in a hash. So what that does is that um, Stacks mirrors the Bitcoin blockchain in the sense that every Stacks node runs a Bitcoin node, and the consensus actually lives on Bitcoin. So the consensus is determined by the Bitcoin transactions on the Bitcoin layer. It's like it's not a proof of stake system. It's similar to a proof of work system, but it's not proof of work because there's no electricity. What's actually happening is instead of me spending all my money running hardware to like essentially bid to win a certain like buying a certain number of lottery tickets for to mine the next block of Bitcoin, what I'm doing is I'm directly spending Bitcoin or making transactions to people who have staked the Stacks token, and then that's like buying a lottery ticket. So it's a similar like you have to spend a resource for a chance to mine a block, and that resource is Bitcoin. So what that means is that people who hold Bitcoin determine the consensus, and the consensus is also determined on the Bitcoin chain. And now that gives it more security than a side chain, where like in a side chain you have like kind of a completely different security model. But with stacks, you have kind of a hybrid. So we've called it like a layer 1.5. Nobody understood what the hell we're talking about. So we've just simplified to like a Bitcoin layer. And there's some other interesting properties, like you can have 100% transaction finality with inheriting 100% of security of Bitcoin hash power after like 150 blocks. So the next release will actually make it identical to Arbitrum or Optimism as a security model after the first 150 blocks, because it will be as immutable as the Bitcoin base layer. And so there's some like gigabrain PhDs like Harvard, MIT, Princeton working on this. Manib and Ryan were both from Princeton. Manib ended up continuing to do his PhD in decentralized systems. Like it's just one of the best high caliber teams that's in the space, I think, period. And yeah, it's like it's the best you can get, in my opinion, as close to an L2. Now there's other experiments coming up with L2. So there's been it's called a sovereign rollup. So instead of like stacks will write a single hash to the Bitcoin blockchain, and that's enough to secure the blocks on stacks through Bitcoin and to use the Bitcoin as a consensus for the consensus. With a sovereign rollup, it's very similar, but you're recording all the data instead of a single hash to actually the same part of the blockchain that the inscriptions are using, right? So it doesn't actually get verified on the Bitcoin chain because it's not possible. Maybe we'll see a future hard fork to Bitcoin to allow some type of verification on the base chain. There's a guy named John Light who's been writing about this and did a research report on it about how ZKs could work on Bitcoin. I'm very interested in it. I'm down to support it. Like my role in the space is like, let's throw 1 million darts at the board and see how we when we hit a bullseye. And so I do think that like there's also people in the Stacks community who are working on ZK and like thinking about how this model could transition to a full ZK approach. But there's a lot of risk in terms of changing Bitcoin, and so it may never become there may never be a change that enables us to verify, different virtual environments on a second layer to the base chain, and that's why I think the approach that Stacks is taking right now is the best, or at least like it's the best right now, and probably for until something changes, it's going to be the best approach.
Interesting. So, I mean, to me, it feels like you feel like you can build things on stacks, and you could have an ecosystem as vibrant as Ethereum is like is that your thesis in your opinion, right?
Yeah, well, my thesis, I would say, let me broaden it. I think that
Yeah.
we're going to have a multi-chain future, but I don't think it's going to be as multi-chain as people think. I think that it will consolidate around specific use cases with large network effects. So I think Bitcoin is one end of the spectrum. I think Ethereum is another end. And I also think like super centralized high-speed chains like Solana are another end of the spectrum. So yeah, so like Ethereum, biggest community, kind of leading edge on innovation. Solana, most centralized, fastest, and then Bitcoin, most secure, decentralized, and you like using the Bitcoin asset like trustless bridges to other layers.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so I want to talk about ordinals because that is obviously what seems. I mean, it feels like we named this our Bitcoin NFTs a fad because Pio loves it when I do these clickbaity titles. But ordinals feels like a pretty big deal in kind of the history of Bitcoin, in my opinion, from what I can see. Like it seems like wow, there's like a real valid use case here that has happened, and it continues to be blowing up. And what are your? So I guess I want to get your view on, as an outsider. I've just kind of seen it from afar. I saw the Yuga drop. I know that there's like hundreds of thousands of inscriptions that have been made now. But as an outsider, still, I'm like, okay, I haven't seen anything that I'm like super excited about beyond just the idea of it, right? Like, so I'm like waiting for maybe a specific artist or some kind of project that I'm excited about to somehow integrate with this and make it really cool. But what are your thoughts? Like, obviously, I'm guessing you don't think this is a fad. The NFTs on Bitcoin are not a fad. But tell me why. Tell me why you think that, and kind of what you see happening now.
Yeah, well, I think it's like there's a lot of liquidity on Bitcoin, right? The sum of the market cap of Bitcoin is more than 2x Ethereum, and so that's a blue ocean market opportunity. Now, you could ask like why don't Bitcoiners buy NFTs on Ethereum? The reality is they do. I mean, 87% of Bitcoiners, people who hold Bitcoin, have multiple altcoins. And so it's only 13% who don't hold anything else. This is according to like a well-researched paper. And
Those are the
so,
loudest. Those 13% are the loudest for sure. Would be my
yeah,
opinion.
And some of them have the least amount of Bitcoin as well. Like, you know, like if you think about the people who were first in the space, in the Bitcoin space, they ended up building the rest of this industry. Like Vitalik started Bitcoin Magazine. Like Vitalik was a hardcore Bitcoiner, and then he started Ethereum. And you can look at, you know, the founders of BitMEX, like CZ from Binance. You can look at all of the biggest names in the space, and you'll find that most of them started as Bitcoiners, right? And then they weren't maximalists. They actually were very into trying new things and, you know, seeing what works and testing things and like being experimental. And that's why they went on to build most of the space. And so, you know, I think that Ethereum NFTs and Bitcoin NFTs or Bitcoin Ordinals, the reason Ordinals have taken off is because they've specialized for a certain use case, right? And so Bitcoin itself is not like the compelling aspect is not that it's better than the ERC 721 standard. Well, actually, it is in some ways, in the fact that it's incredibly simple. So, but it's really an improvement over IPFS and Arweave and file storage, right? Because it's much cheaper to put something fully on chain on Bitcoin than it is on Ethereum, and it's also the standard. Like it is a new standard, and the new standard is fully on chain, you know, and there's no like it just works like Bitcoin. Like there's nothing else you could do. Like there's no like, you know, at Ninjalerts where we do like analytics for NFTs and helping traders like identify new projects, the variability in like ERC 721 contracts is insane. Like when we just launched, our app broke like at least once a month because someone did something incredibly weird with the NFT contract. And as you know, so it's like that's a benefit, but also a weakness. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Ordinals like making the opposite trade-offs. So this is what part of my thesis in the entire space is like being different is the most important factor. And like the more like if you can actually identify what that spectrum is, and then you can see where Ethereum is positioned on that spectrum and go to the opposite end like Solana did, and you know Ethereum is kind of moving to the opposite end of the spectrum of where Bitcoin is. That's most likely to hit on something big, and then maybe you overreach it, but you kind of course correct backwards. But I'm really looking for contrast, right? That's the main thing I look for as a VC, and I think the main thing a lot of investors look for is contrast. Like I'm not looking for Coca-Cola and Pepsi. I'm looking for Coca-Cola and coffee and bottled water. You know, like things that are not the exact same. It's like, why would I, you know, Avalanche, Solana, you know, like people, you tend to see this cascade of like things being very similar, like so many proof of stake chains. You know, I think the fact that Ethereum moved to proof of stake is going to make it a lot harder for the other proof of stake chains to break through, right? So the more similar your product, et cetera, is to what's leading the market, the harder it's going to be to get that adoption, because you have to have a base of really passionate users, and those people are only going to come because they're not being served in the market. And so with Ordinals, they attach this use case, which hit the 2080 value of NFTs on Ethereum because of its limited technology on Bitcoin. And then they did something so different that it found a core group of people who really gravitated towards it. And, you know, we do see some really cool projects coming up. I think, you know, some of them aren't public yet. I would recommend, if you want to see something kind of that's like, I think going to be really innovative from a technology perspective, I would check out OnChain Monkeys and Danny Hewitt, what he's doing. He just announced on our show last night they're going to be doing something with 3D files on Bitcoin, where the way that collections work on Bitcoin is that you actually have to send a transaction. You create a parent inscription, and then for every next inscription, you send a transaction where they're both in the same transaction, and that links the parent to the child because it shows that you hold the parent, and then when you mint the child, they're connected. And so he's doing something connecting 3D files to each other through that strategy of like putting them through the same transaction. That's all he told us. But he's he's an OG, actually an OG Bitcoiner. Started the Stanford Bitcoin meetup and kind of pioneered a lot of the on-chain art in the Ethereum space, along with a lot of other people. But there's going to be people coming back to it. Like we had Mouse Dev on our space last night. There's a lot of Ethereum developers think it's super cool, and I think so. People will be surprised. It's just a very easy. It's a very easy thing to do. Like I think that's been part of my thesis as well. Is like every NFT collection, every developer is going to want to do something on Ordinals as a gimmick, if nothing else, and that's going to kind of get the flywheel going, where we'll see more and more come out, and eventually it will reach that. It will grow from this seedling into something what it's meant to be.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I didn't know that about OnChain Monkeys. I know that DGods is doing stuff as well, which is cool. Obviously, Yuga did it. So yeah, I think you're right in saying that there's a bunch of people on Ethereum that are saying, yeah, let's have some kind of component like that's on Ordinals. And for me, when I think of it, it makes a lot of sense, especially for something that's static, right? Like art, for example, that makes a lot of sense to me. That art could be, you could use that for art. So if I understand correctly, right? Like you're inscribing something on a Satoshi, right? So one Satoshi gets one inscription. Is that correct? So theoretically, there's like a finite number of inscriptions that can ever exist. Now that number is massive, right? But like theoretically, am I thinking through this correctly?
So you can actually inscribe the same Satoshi multiple times. So
Oh, I did not know that.
yeah,
Okay.
so one of the coolest things is that this is a whole different design space, right? So from a technology perspective, it's a whole different design space, which means that there will be some really weird stuff created that's unexpected. And that's part of the fun of being involved in it. And now the thing that makes these scarce is not the limited number of Satoshis, because there's like, I don't know, trillions. I don't know the exact number.
Yeah.
But the fact that there's only 2 gigabytes of block space available per year. And so, oh, sorry, 200 gigabytes, not 2 gigabytes. But,
Okay.
I have like 2 terabytes on my MacBook Pro. Like how many people buy 1 terabyte hard drive of the MacBook Pro every year? 200 gigabytes is tiny. So there's going to be built-in scarcity to this. And you'll see, Danny from OnChain Monkeys has been doing some things like, because on-chain NFTs on Ethereum are also, very optimized, or they use SVGs and functions by plugging in data into a function that generates an SVG to do that. And so there's creative ways to get that down. But the result is going to be that it'll probably be, the fees are going to go up on the chain to where it is going to be 100x more expensive. That'll probably drive more demand, honestly. Like I've been telling people, this idea of like scalability being necessary has mostly been proven wrong, I think, in the last 2 years, in the last bull cycle, because again, we're only like 7 million monthly active Ethereum users. Like there's not 100 million people coming in here. And the way that the current users look at the space is like, it's like, hey, if you see gas fees being really high, you kind of get excited. It's kind of like walking by a restaurant that has a long line outside the door. And then you're like, you see these other blockchains where like, oh, we're so scalable, but it's like an empty restaurant. And you're like, I don't know, I think I want to wait in line for an hour for this other restaurant over here. So, I think it will end up specializing in high-end art. I think you'll have like brands like Louis Vuitton, Tiffany's, whatever they do, they're going to be like, I want to be associated with the brand of Bitcoin, because I do think it is the biggest brand. There's still so many people in the world who don't even know what Ethereum is.
Yeah.
And you ask them, what is Ethereum? It's like Ethereum what? You say like Bitcoin. It's just much more approachable to, I think, the mass market. And so I think that's where it'll evolve to, as well as for inscribing data. So like when I announced we rebranded our fund from Stacks Ventures to Bitcoin Frontier Fund, one of our portfolio companies, Seigel, is a Web3 writing platform. They now have a tool where you can inscribe your writing as an ordinal. And so I inscribed my essay for $12 forever on Bitcoin blockchain using Seigel. And there's also a protocol called 1BTC.news that's now picking up this protocol to read news from the ledger. So, there's a lot of use cases for the idea of making something permanent forever, right? Through the Bitcoin blockchain that go beyond the high-end art market. And so I think it's like high-end art, news, censorship resistance, the ledger of record. We're also seeing namespaces, digital identity through inscribing JSON. I think we'll see 1,000 experiments in the next few years as to how to use this. Some of them are going to stick, some of them are not. Some of them are not going to scale once we get to a certain level, and then they'll move to the L2s like Lightning stacks, and any others based on the trade-offs and what the environment of the space is at that time.
That's really cool. And I got to give a shout out. I got a buddy that was talking to me and saying, hey, has anybody inscribed like the US Constitution yet? Or some of these books that are getting, we're starting to hear about how people are like, going back and rewriting, editing like old Roald Dahl books. And you're like, okay, this is interesting. But also, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of that. And so that actually makes a ton of sense. It's like, okay, these documents or these books that we want to exist forever, and know what the, hopefully like it becomes like a single source of truth, right? And obviously the person that puts it on there, it's got to, somehow we've got to say like this was the correct document. But it feels like that's a really interesting use case when it comes to Bitcoin. I suppose you kind of run into issues though with the 200 gigabytes per year of space. Like, is it hard to inscribe an entire book? I imagine that might take up some space.
Yeah, so we could do the math on that. It was 10. It was basically, it's like $10 for 1,000 words right now, and that was at peak. That was at the peak 2 days ago. So depending on like the time of the day, like the actual price of gas, it could vary. So 100,000 words, that's going to cost $1,000, I guess, right? Like that's not that much to inscribe a book forever, right? Potentially, like the fact that it could outlast our civilization and maybe aliens will read it someday. Hey, the value prop is compelling, I think.
That's really interesting. Okay, yeah, very, very interesting. Okay, so we're running a little bit near the end here, and so I want to ask you like one of the main questions, which we should have gotten into earlier, which is how do people get involved? Like, where do I go? What should I do if I want to start exploring this? Because I really have no idea. I was afraid to like hop in Discords and do the OTC trades back in like, right when this was first starting. What would you suggest for somebody that's interested in getting involved in like starting to look at ordinals, whether they want to inscribe or buy? Where do we go? What do we do?
Yeah, so I would recommend getting involved in some of the projects that are doing ordinal stuff. I can list some of them, like getting involved, getting a 12-fold. Yuga Labs, OnChain Monkeys, they're doing a ton of this stuff. D Gods, Sappy Seals is doing a little bit of stuff. There's also a collection called Megapont, which is from the Stacks community, which is big into this. Taproot Wizards, of course. Take a shower in a wizard costume, get it up there. Shoot your shot. And then we're going to be doing some stuff with my one of my previous business partners, Collections, Crash Punks on Stacks. We'll be doing some stuff with ordinals. I also run the Ordinal show twice a week on Twitter Spaces, so you can come in there. Node, you're welcome anytime, my friend. Just request.
I had no idea that you were running an Ordinals space, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
So definitely everyone check it out. When and what time is that at? You said twice a week.
Yeah, Mondays at 10:30 a.m. and Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. And so
that's
it's
Eastern.
Yeah. So it's at the Ordinal show. Follow it. We have a Substack newsletter that we post RCPs to, and yeah, no, let's have you on, man. Let's come talk about this.
Dude, I'd love to. I'm like the ignorant, the ignorant guy that doesn't know, but I'm so curious. This has been super helpful. I really appreciate it. Any final like thoughts and like ideas that you would have to share with people that are just kind of just barely getting involved in NFTs in general, or even in crypto in general? What advice would you give to the newbies or people that are just out there and a little down on their luck and trying to make it?
Yeah, I would say if you're just starting out in the space, like focus on like learning, focus on education. Like for me, I didn't know Ordinals was going to be this big as it is now, but I was clued in because I was intellectually interested in Bitcoin and where it's going and the culture, and I was always learning every day. And so as this story unfolded, it became clearer and clearer to me that this is going to be big, and I think I was able to identify that before most people. And so, don't just go into something because your friend gives you a good pitch on it, you're like, oh wow, like, the people who actually do make money in this space is because they specialize and because they learn. And yeah, a lot of people get lucky, but most times it's not a coincidence, right? That someone is successful at doing something. And so, like I've been on this train for the past 2 years and never knew it was gonna like kind of turn the corner like 2 months ago. I was ready, I was prepared for it to turn the corner 18 months from now, if it had to be, or 3 years from now, what I'm saying? But I would say eventually, like, it takes a long time for the truth to play out, but eventually people catch on, and if you've really identified a truth in the market, it will happen. And so you just got to be ready for that to be the case, and prepare yourself, and contribute to help making it happen. And that's going to end up, if you want to make money in the space, that's going to be the best way. Like the worst way to make money is to try to make money. Like
Yeah.
most attempts to try to make money were like, you have a thought like, oh, this will make a lot of money, fail. Like you're usually going to lose a lot of money. But most attempts to like create value in the space are going to lead to creating money. So that's my recommendation for people.
I love that. And that your answer also made me quite much more bullish on Ordinals itself because of the way you just described it as like a turning point and like the how you're viewing this. Clearly, you're taking this seriously as like a very important next step for Bitcoin and what it has to offer. So, man, really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for all of the education. For basically I'm like a normie to you in your world. So this has been awesome. Everyone, thanks for joining. Check out Trevor. You have a great Twitter handle now. It's just like TO. Like that is gangster level. It's like having a great domain name, like you've got just 2 letters. Everyone go check out Trevor.BTC. We mentioned he's got Twitter spaces a couple times a week on Ordinals. You were also on Pio's show, right? Doing talking Bitcoin as well. So check him out there. And everyone, if you're listening right now, stick around. In about 10 minutes, I got Ledger coming on. So I got a double header today. Thanks again, Trevor, and we'll catch you everyone next week.
Thanks so much.